Welcome to everybody. We're here today with Jackie Ailing from the University of Southampton, and she's going to talk to you about best practice on city dashboards. Jackie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Anthony. Good morning, everyone. My name's Jackie Ailing. My background is I'm doing research at the moment into the ethics of data flows in smart cities, so you may notice some of those themes appearing in this talk. I've also got a background of working with sustainable social housing projects and urban regeneration and with NGOs around young people's issues, so I've got a background of working out in the field as well. So let's get on and start talking about city dashboards, what they are and how we might usefully apply them in our cities. As we know, there are now a huge variety of systems that are producing streams of data, what we might call smart city technologies. So in the area of governance, lots of e-governance systems, citizen participation platforms, not sure how well they're going, but online transactions, city operating systems. Obviously, we've got already existing systems like security and emergency services. Transport is one of the sort of key areas where these dashboards are being used, where we're collecting a lot of data around transport issues. We obviously got stuff around energy with smart grids and lighting, smart meters. We've got waste management. For example, Delft is working on one of those projects with information coming back from the field via IoT. Lots of sensor networks being put in the environment to measure various things. We've got systems within buildings and within homes. There's data being generated about the economy, around innovation, open data, and there's also stuff around health and well-being. So how can we use this for public health, social services, these kind of applications? So all of these sources are generating what we might call urban big data. So some of these are directed, so they may be kind of surveillance systems like CCTV, or they may be collected as public administration records. We've also got automated systems like automatic number plate recognition systems. We've got digital services. We've got all the IoT systems that are feeding in data. We've got interactions and transactions. How are services and citizens interacting in the city? And then we've got large sources of volunteer data from social media, things like wearables, crowdsourcing, citizen science. So there is what one might call possibly a data deluge, or I saw on the Fireware site recently they were talking about data lakes, possibly a bit more like data oceans. So with all this data, what can we do with it? How can we most usefully deploy it within our cities in order to get the best value out of this data? There are many kind of large companies at the moment looking at city operating systems. So thinking about operating systems that may in the past have operated in kind of closed environments, so in manufacturing or managing a port environment. These are now being scaled up to think about operating a city in this same way. So these will be platforms, a lot of them, the idea of like drawing in lots of IoT data and other sources of data in order to try and make sense of it, city sense, as IBM calls it. I know across Europe, and you'll be encouraged to be using the Fireware platform. So that's the kind of coordinating platform inside that's bringing in your data. At the moment, Fireware and We4City are doing a big project, the very famous example of a city operating system, obviously, in Rio. So they've got a very big command and control center, and they're looking at working towards better ways for managing, visualizing, and also pushing out that data to other services and out to citizens. So there are already existing control rooms within your city that are already managing real-time data flows. So you've got traffic systems, you may have control rooms that are managing your traffic lights. You've got emergency services, so police, ambulances, those kind of things. With security services, there will be control rooms for managing utilities, water, gas, electricity. There are telecoms control rooms. There are control rooms for maritime and ports. And the idea is to start to try and merge some of these data flows together to gain a kind of complete view over the city. There's also so this is all data that's being used internally by the city and by services already. But we also need to think about surfacing this data. So opening access to this data so we can build dashboards on top of it that are either going to be used by internal services and out to citizens, businesses for innovation. Data being made available to the public to make their own decisions. But obviously all of this data cannot be pushed out and be made open. And obviously around the projects that SCIFI has been doing already, there are lots of questions about what can and can't be opened, how it can be opened. Lots of issues around data quality and veracity. The kind of data that's often opened onto city dashboards that's made public is often in an anonymous and aggregated form. Obviously, we can't have personal data put out there, and we can't have kind of data that identifies individuals. So urban dashboards, really what they are is a visual means to interact with and organise data. So they should be ideally providing us with sort of better cognitive tools. So we've got better control over these large data flows that are changing rapidly over time. They also enable users to explore data sets and to interpret trends. So it's not just about the real-time data that's coming in now, it's about using historical data, putting that data together and seeing what does that mean, and then also ultimately to make predictions and also to make changes out in the world. What these urban dashboards often claim to do is that it's going to show you in detail and often in real time the state of play of your city. And what it's going to do is cities are messy. They are human, social environments. They are complex. What these urban dashboards, and certainly with the kind of companies who would like to sell you products around them, lots of lovely branding and marketing. So the idea is that you're going to suddenly have this rational, detailed, systematic and ordered form of knowledge that translates the kind of wicked problems of your city into some sort of beautiful visualization and control system so that you can order your city better. And the promise is that it will enable us to know the city as it actually is, and that the data that we're presented with is objective, is trustworthy, and is factual data that enables us to make decisions. Now, I would question, obviously, data is never just collected. There are many decisions around what data can be collected, what is possible to collect, what shouldn't be collected, what we don't want to collect. There are lots of issues around, for example, you could think about a sensor. If I want to measure air pollution in my city, there would be lots of decisions made about the calibration of that sensor, what it will measure, the placing of that sensor, what sensitivities, political, business, economic there are around where those sensors go. For example, in Southampton, we've got a big air quality issue, but ABP, who own our port, do not want the city to put air quality monitors in their land next to the port. So the data that is produced into these dashboards is never just an objective kind of all-seeing eye onto the city. We have to remember that this data is partial and it is not necessarily reliable, that some of it is missing, and that there are decisions and choices made around what data is collected about whom. So we can use these dashboards in a variety of ways. So they can be used in a very sort of instrumental way to performance manage your city services, staff and processes. So you can use it internally and also push out your kind of metrics and targets and how is your city doing? But you can use it internally to make sure that each service is meeting its targets. You can also use it obviously to make policy decisions. If you're pushing that data out and making it open, it can be used for innovation, can be used for all sorts of citizen services, and allegedly used for participation. I think this is a very difficult thing to achieve, but ongoing, having some element of citizens being able to participate in this process of the uses of data, why it's being used, what's being collected, is going to become increasingly important. So is this data that we're collecting really just a window on the world? So the claims that are made that it's neutral and value-free and it reveals some sort of truth about the city. But, you know, as I've described already, this is actually a pipeline of technologies and decisions, and these aren't value neutral. There are all sorts of issues around deciding the how, the what, the where, the who of data collection. What variables are you going to use? What proxies are you going to use? And who decides how that data will be analysed and presented? All these have kind of complex social, cultural, historical and political inputs, things that aren't presented and are difficult to visualise in a city dashboard. And this data is often decontextualised, so it doesn't take into account these other important aspects of our cities. So it's always important to bear in mind that this data and these visualizations are just translations. They're partial representations of the real world. They are not just mirrors. They're not just telling us how things are. So we need to be very careful about how we use and interpret this data. So obviously, you know, always issues around data quality. What's the validity of the analysis of that data, even if the data is of a reasonable quality and there's not lots of it missing? We've got lots of issues around instrument bias, instrument errors, human errors, biases. Often data can be published without metadata, so I've got no way of knowing where it came from, how it was produced. Was it all, for example, if it's sensor data, was it all from the same sensor? Has that sensor been changed? Has the collection mechanism or the variables been changed over time? And very rarely do we get access to the algorithms that do the analytics on this data. So we've also got a kind of black boxing of the processing. If you look on the right hand side of the screen, this is a kind of example about how interpreting data at different levels of granularity can lead to very different visualizations and then very different decisions about what data means. These are maps of employment rates within some areas within a city. So blue is employment, the bright blue color is employment over 45%. The red is employment below something like 20%. So these visualizations are of exactly the same data, but as we move down, so you can see if I was trying to devise a policy to intervene with poverty or some sort of strategy about employment, okay, if I looked at the first visualization, I would want to target the whole of that area. As I move down to final levels of granularity, so as we look at the bottom visualization in the bottom right hand corner, we can see that actually at a fine level of granularity there are small pockets of sort of hardcore unemployment, and most of that area that was identified in the first visualization, you wouldn't want to be putting any strategies in there at all. So we also need to be very careful about how we use this, how we interpret it. And obviously there are a lot of skills needed in order to use this data effectively. There are also some ethical considerations around these kind of smart city systems. They can produce, obviously, all smart city systems have a danger of moving into like a surveillance system and data surveillance. So either purely use of CCTV, or collecting data about citizens and actions through my transactions and my activities online. Privacy issues, not usually so much of an issue with this kind of dashboard visualizations. This is often aggregated data, but there may be sort of privacy and ethical issues behind how data is collected. I may have a project where, for example, I'm tracking MAC addresses around the city. I mean, has there really been notice and consent around the collection of that data, even though the data that I'm actually surfacing that anyone can see doesn't identify individuals? Has the process of collecting that data, has that had due consideration about whether it's has any privacy concerns? Lots of issues around ownership and control. So who collects and owns the data? There's a lot of public and private partnership goes on in these projects. So there are issues around procurement, who owns the data. So is the data collector the one who maintains control of it? So contracts and procurement, having a sharp eagle eye about the sovereignty of your data. How do you as a city have access to it? Do the collectors of this data, who may be private companies, have they retained a right maybe to sell it on into a data market? Are they going to find a commercial use for this data? Is that appropriate given the service and given citizens' views on that? Obviously, these kind of dashboards, as you saw from the previous slides, can be used for all sorts of social sorting, exclusion and inclusion, redlining, identifying areas that are high in crime, or these kind of issues. So we have to be careful about how we're presenting our city and what kind of assumptions may be made, and how included and excluded various groups and areas may be. We've got all sorts of predictive profiling stuff going on, and anticipatory governance. So trying to predict from our data and then intervene. Is that always ethical? Are we doing that appropriately? What are the unintended consequences of doing that? There's a lot of nudge stuff going on. So there are many nudge apps in a smart city space around energy or travel or environmental behaviour. There's a lot of questions around who decides, how people are nudged, who is being nudged. Is it focused on particular target groups? Are there any sort of kind of bias, discrimination, unfairness, or kind of unethical manipulation going on? We've got kind of data security and cyber security. What happens if your systems are hacked? A really big issue. Absolutely have to be hot on that one. And then there's control creep. I might design a system to, for example, in London, they put in a big string of a camera system. This was supposed to be for pollution charging and congestion control, and ultimately those cameras and those systems have now been used as security systems in order for the security services to control those areas. What does it do and who's it for? So when you're thinking about building these systems, there's an internal audience and there's an external audience. So internal management and policy processes, and then you've got your public platform. Are you even going to make a public platform? Who is that for? What's it going to do? Then you've got all the open data issues. So pushing out as much as you can onto an open platform, allowing access to the data behind the visualizations, having open APIs. These are all kind of issues that are around the kind of SCIFI project. Do you have the right skills? Okay. Your users, whether they're internal or external, do they have the right data literacy, ICT skills? Have you thought very carefully around this sort of navigation, the use of tools, the interpretation? Beware of assumptions about people's skills and data literacy. thinking about who will be able to use and who won't be able to use your dashboard, who is excluded, why, and can you do anything about that? So when we look at internal dashboards, you need to think about your stakeholders and your data sources, and obviously the issues around bringing vertical silos together. So how are we going to bring different departments and services together? What are the issues around data sharing? So obviously there's work going on. For example, Kieran O'Hara in my own department in Southampton is looking at data trusts. How can you build up trusted internal networks between services? So we've got things like in our own city in Southampton, we've got the City Council, NHS, we've got emergency services, we've got things like the business and the local economic partnerships. We've got local voluntary sector. How can you start to bring the data that they hold and the data sets that they have, bringing those together? These are quite complex sort of data sharing issues. And obviously being able to bring them together into dashboards that people can use and share involves all sorts of data sharing issues. I think Sophie's going to talk about some of these data sharing issues in her next talk. Obviously issues around privacy. Some of this data is very personal data, and obviously cybersecurity again. And then thinking about the data that you're going to use internally, how can you push it? What can you push out, and how can you push it out to the public domain? So I'd say for both internal dashboards and external dashboards is thinking about using a kind of agile software development process where you think about user stories, you think about your stakeholders, their activities, go and find out what they actually do, and also get feedback, ongoing iterations during your development. So in agile development, for example, you create personas. So a persona is a person plus a need and a purpose. So as a local government policy maker, I want to view local and national statistics so that I can produce effective funding bids, for example. That's a persona. And you might develop different personas. So you need to develop different personas for different types of users, and then talk through how these personas will use and interact with any system that you're designing, or designing with an outside entity. So you might have like a power user, someone who's has quite a lot of data science and statistical skills. You might have a middle kind of user, so a policy or management user who can understand the data but is not a data scientist, and wants to use this in a quite fine-grained way for their own purposes. And then a kind of functional user who maybe just be using it for their own terms inside their own job role. So I want to know, how many bins have been collected this week, who collected them and why. Don't want to go any further than that. Are they able to sensibly interact with your dashboard? Let's go back to this one. There are some really interesting kind of projects out there bringing together for internal. This is for internal dashboards, thinking about how to deliver services better. There's a link at the end for this, for example, a California homelessness project, which was bringing together lots of different service providers and then providing visualizations and a dashboard in order to track homeless individuals throughout a city or a state, and then to intervene better and to provide better interventions. So it's interesting to go and look at how some innovative projects. There's a link at the end if you wanted to go and have a bit of a better look. Public dashboards. Okay, so if we go and look around outside and see what other people are doing, people are bringing together all sorts of kind of sets of data and visualizations onto a platform. So you've got kind of public data. How is my city doing? Crime, services, economic data, travel, the environment, services, pulling together links to various apps and location-based services that may already be operating in your city space, the ability for citizens to report back, emergency services, city alerts and emergencies, so kind of flood alerts, or these kind of if you've got specific issues within your city, when you may need to give out kind of citywide alerts, visual statistics, events and tourism as well. That's a kind of how you can start to try and bring in the more sort of cultural and social life. So when you're trying to think about your public dashboard, think about what you want on there. But obviously don't try and reinvent any wheels. Okay, so you look around what existing tools and services are already in your city. Can you pull them together and link them into your platform? So here's a couple of examples of city dashboards. There's one in Dublin that's been a long kind of academic project running in Dublin, so it's worth going and looking at the programmable city set of. There's a huge set of kind of academic work and papers around that if you're interested in various aspects. The actual city dashboard was funded by some science foundation funding, so I'm not sure it's live anymore. Obviously you've got the London dashboard again. That was a University College London project. I would say when I go and look at these live, the one on the right hand side, the London one, doesn't seem to be active or up and running because there's lots of data missing out of it now. So think about sustainability. Okay, don't build something that next year, the year after, you can't maintain. There's no funding for it, and it becomes a kind of useless artifact filling up the web, of which there are many. Like this for public dashboards, again, the same considerations as you would have for your internal stakeholders is use personas. Think about who are the users of your site, okay, and create some kind of personas, and think about that when you're creating and designing your site. So beware that the digital literacy and the data literacy in the public and across many stakeholders can be very low. So for a kind of very excitable SME or kind of or larger company providing, you know, a beautiful new product, to them it looks, you know, it looks like it's really easy to use and it's completely obvious. But you may well find there are many users that will you know, jump away from the site immediately and not know how to interact and change variables on a GIS map, for example. And don't make the assumption just because you've stuck some data out there that this represents real or meaningful communication, because often it doesn't. And obviously, as you're being pushed to do in SCIFI, is if you're going to do data visualizations, try to also make the data behind that open, in order that for people wanting to create other services for your city and to run things off of your data, they can get access to it. But always consider your ordinary user. Okay, so a public-facing dashboard is for citizens, not just for business interests, and not just for app developers. Or so always think about them. What is useful for them? So you know, can you find a way to design your dashboard so that it's serving a variety of stakeholders, for example, civil society groups, activists, those who may like to push back against kind of activities and decision making in the city. And do citizens have the chance to change anything or to participate? Or are they just passive consumers of the data that you're pushing out there? A kind of build it and they will come attitude, a sort of interesting comment by Professor Rob Kitchen, who worked with Maynooth University on the Dublin City dashboard. The problem with the Dublin dashboard at the moment is we lose 90% of users within 5 seconds of landing on the site. So, you know, think about what is the real impact of your site, who are you aiming it at, and how are you going to make it so that users actually want to interact with it. You know, some quick points about data visualizations. Okay, we we can have some very silly visualizations, like, for example, this one here. So if I, as a citizen, wanted to look at this visualization, this is one from the US, for example. So if I wanted to know how much greenhouse gases a certain San Francisco city sector emitted, I could not work it out from that chart. Completely useless piece of visualization. So with data visualizations, keep it simple. Make sure your labels and legends are accurate. Don't rely on a piece of software to do it for you. You always need to check that. Make sure it's clearly formatted and that the amount of data that's represented is sensible. And try and be creative in order to show the important insights from that data and get perspectives from different users. And please make sure it works. I went, for example, to look at Glasgow with Innovate UK. I've got an exciting new project for a smart city dashboard, one that you're going to be able to kind of take widgets and build your own sort of customizable dashboard. When I went on it, beautiful landing page. The message I got was, your connection is not secure. My browser wouldn't have it. So it doesn't work. Please make sure your products work. So key points, think about what's going to work for your city. All right. So the data comes from a variety of sources, and dashboards can be useful to surface this data either internally or externally. Obviously open the data behind the dashboards as much as you can as possible. Have a good look round at other examples, what other people are doing, what works, what doesn't work, and think about how that translates to your city. Always keep the purpose and users of your dashboard in mind, okay? Think about your personas, think about who can use this and why they're using it. Keep a skeptical and critical mindset, always about the uses of this data. Consider any wider ethical issues, all right? And always think about data sovereignty. Can I, as a city, keep control of my data? Am I doing smart procurement that serves my citizens? And with that, I will stop. If anyone's got any questions, I'd like to follow up. There's a few links at the end. But other than that, I think I'm pretty much finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. We'll just wait a few seconds to see if there's any question popping. So far, no question. Thank you very much. It was very clear, very, very complete. It does not seem like we have any question, but I think we will close the webinar here. And if there's any question, they can contact us at hello@smartcityinnovation.eu, and we will answer them or direct them to you if there's any.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, happy to answer questions afterwards. Absolutely happy. Please do get in touch with me.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jackie.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
All right, bye.